we are back on the 0 hour. You know, the word of the week is TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the President of the United States is trying to push through with the help of the Republicans and the opposition of large segments of his own party, as well as large segments of his own base. Here to talk about that topic with us now is David Dayen. David is a contributing writer to Salon, weekly columnist for the Fiscal Times. He has written for The New Republic, Vice, a number of other places, and he has a book coming out for the New Press, coming out sometime this year. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, RJ.
Oh, you bet. And listen, I always appreciate your writing. This piece, though, you outdid yourself. Your piece is entitled, and since we both write for Salon, we know we don't always write our own headlines, but the 10 biggest lies you've been told about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm just going to quote you to start off. After President Obama kind of maligned Elizabeth Warren's motivation and honesty and all of this, which you describe, you write, it is beneath the dignity of the presidency to so aggressively paint opponents as not just wrong on the facts, but hiding the truth on purpose. Warren has responded without using the same indecorous tactics. Unfortunately, I, meaning you, David Dayen, don't have the same self-control. Well, far be it from me to inhibit you, first of all. And number one. And number two, since this is a great piece, I wanted to go through it with you a little bit because, you know, you basically said, look, let's not be overly genteel about this. We're being lied to. We're being misled about the TPP. So I wanted to go through these with you because I really appreciated them. Starting with number one, well, let me start with one that is implicit in a number of your points, especially the first one. But just bugs me, okay, when the argument is made, well, we can't turn our back on trade, or we can't turn our back on trading with the world. Isn't that really a false choice? Is anybody suggesting we turn our back? Is this really about trade at all?
Right. It's sort of impossible at this point to turn your back on trading with the world. In general, global trade is characterized at this point by very low tariffs and easy flow of goods from one country to the next. That's certainly true of most of the trading partners in this agreement. 6 of the 12 trading partners, we already have free trade agreements locked in with, and the other big one that we don't, which is Japan. Japan's tariffs are about 1% on the average on their goods. So the idea that this is going to open new markets and do all these wondrous things that are going to create jobs is just a PR job, basically. And yes, it is. There is a characterization made, and it's been made for 20 years, that if you don't support these kinds of deals, which have less to do with trade and more to do with guaranteeing profits for multinational corporations in a variety of ways, then you are a protectionist. You're like Smoot and Hawley. You're going to cause another depression. You are turning your back on the world, and you're destroying the economic benefits that come out of globalized trade.
Boy, I'll tell you, that Smoot and Hawley diss really stings, doesn't it? I hate being out at a bar and someone saying, "Are you Smoot today or are you Hawley?"
Smoot? Yeah, right. But indeed, that's the point. Like the idea is that, and Smoot and Hawley, for the benefit of our listeners, were these two members of Congress who passed a tariff bill in the early 1930s, right after the stock market crash, which some people have taken to be the root cause of the deepening depression that happened around the world, because when you put up barriers to trade, then all of these terrible consequences occur. It's actually not true, but right. It's been used very successfully for the last 80 years to demonize opponents of these corporate-written trade deals.
But that's going to be my new threat from now on, by the way. Don't make me get all Smoot on your behind. Now, that said, let's get into some of these other misapprehensions that are in this, the way this has been presented. First of all, starting with the fact that, as you said, it's not really even a trade deal per se. We're trading already. It is a maximization of profit deal. Well, sorry. First of all, as you say, the 40% of GDP. We keep hearing we can't really turn our backs on a deal that involves 40% of GDP. What's wrong with that assertion?
Well, 22% of global GDP is us. So, you know, any bill, a bill renaming a post office, involves 22% of global GDP in some manner or another. And as I just said, the majority of the rest, we already have free trade agreements with. Or their tariffs are so low as to be infinitesimal and irrelevant. So this isn't really a deal that's about, you know, setting these new wonderful trade rules for these countries. It's a deal about making very aggressive intellectual property agreements so that prescription drug prices will be higher, that Hollywood movie content won't be pirated, and it's about setting up processes so investments in foreign countries are protected by an extrajudicial process, basically exporting our comparative advantage in terms of rule of law into these other countries, so that undermining basically our ability to compete for manufacturing and for jobs even more.
We're talking with writer David Dayen about the TPP, so-called trade treaty the president is trying to push through. And by the way, Dave, you would have appreciated when I was first assigned in a previous life to Eastern Europe, before, just as communism was falling, before there were any intellectual property protections, you would see the craziest McDonald's restaurants, or you know, or movies that were just like cheap knockoffs of Star Wars. It was a fascinating thing. But yeah, so this is really about profit maximization. We're really already in this 40% we're talking about. In fact, we're more than half of that 40% ourselves. And what about a job creation? This is the biggie. You know, we hear Hillary Clinton, who has not stepped in on the fast track deal to try to slow it down, says, well, I won't support a deal that's not for jobs. The president insists this will support an additional 650,000 jobs. Why don't we believe that claim?
And since then they've soft pedaled that because they know that it's actually not true. They base that statistic on a report by the Peterson Institute of International Economics that the report's author even said was a misapplication of the premises of the report. And the idea is that trade of this nature doesn't create new jobs. It might change the mix of jobs that are out there and available, but it just doesn't do that. And that is why the administration has sort of backed away from that, and they're starting to talk about consumer prices, and they're talking about containing China, and they're talking about all of these other things, other than the fact that this deal would not create many, if any, net new jobs or higher wages.
Well, and to that point, your next couple points. One, they always talk about exports, not imports, but they also keep saying that that's like me balancing my checkbook by counting deposits and not the checks I write, isn't it? Kind of. I mean, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what we're seeing right now, by the way, in the economy, which GDP was down in the first quarter, and a large percentage of that is due to the fact that we have this burgeoning trade deficit. And it has to do a lot with geopolitical factors and the fact that our economy looks better compared to the economies of Europe and perhaps China. And the dollar has become much stronger in this country, which means that our exports are not, they're more expensive. So we have this huge trade deficit, and talking just about the export side of the ledger doesn't really tell you anything about whether it's getting better or not. As you just said, your analogy is fine. The analogy I used was it's like giving the score of a ball game by saying Dodgers 4, and nothing else. So
Right.
this is a major problem with how they're talking about this, and they're hiding the ball. They're basically saying that just look at the export side. As long as we increase our exports, that will create better paying jobs and higher wages and things. But of course, the imports are also a factor in that equation when you're calculating the effects on wages and jobs and things. And right now, we have a natural experiment of that, and we're seeing that because of the trade deficit, we are losing jobs in these manufacturing jobs have been stagnant since the beginning of the year, and this is the reason why.
And in addition to that, as long as we're talking about things like the strong dollar, which people should understand, when the dollar is high compared to other currencies, American stuff is expensive, and people don't want to buy it in other countries or are less eager to buy it. Now, in addition, one of the things that this deal does not address is currency manipulation.
Right.
And
another manner in which the dollar becomes inflated relative to other currencies is that other countries artificially lower the value of their currency through monetary policy or through just deliberate manipulation. And that makes their exports relatively cheaper. And one of the big countries that does this is China, but also some of our TPP negotiating partners like Japan and Malaysia are very big into currency manipulation. So this package, which is supposed to be this sign-on agreement that any country, including China, can sign on to at some point in the future, has no provisions for currency manipulation. And in fact, the bill that Democrats wanted to get through, which did have some stronger enforcement of currency manipulation, they wanted to tie that bill to Trade Promotion Authority, or Fast Track, the other day in Congress. They ended up coming up with a compromise that split the two bills, and John Boehner said, well, there's no way we're doing that currency bill. And the reason is it would undermine the agreement. Japan wouldn't agree to it. Malaysia wouldn't agree to it. So the idea.
And by the way, just to jump in, we're talking with writer Dayen about the new so-called trade bill. The interconnectedness of the currency manipulation. It wasn't just some sort of parliamentary maneuver by the Democrats. You cannot call, and this is going to get us to our next point, you cannot call this TPP the most progressive trade deal in history, as Obama has done, if, among other things, you don't address the issue of currency manipulation, which has an enormous impact on American working people, or for that matter, on the enforcement of labor rights for workers in other countries. So we could get to that.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Most progressive trade deal in history?
Yeah, not quite. Sander Levin, who negotiated what is known as the May 10th Agreement, which was a series of labor and environmental enforcement standards on some various other free trade agreements with Panama and Colombia, says that this agreement falls short of that. And so has the Sierra Club and other environmental groups after seeing a leaked version of the text of the environmental chapter. The real problem is that these things are, the enforcement of these standards has been called into question. We have a trade agreement with Colombia, and that nation is known very across the world for murdering trade unionists. And since the enactment of this agreement, which was supposed to put a stop to this, 105 trade unionists have been killed and assassinated in Colombia. And when you ask the U.S. trade rep about this, they say, well, it's getting a little better.
Right. Right.
One every other week is being killed instead of...
Right. I wanted you to confirm this for me, because this is where cognitive dissonance kicks in, where you have, how do we put it? You have people saying actually that the pace of killing in Colombia has slowed down to... and they're saying this is equally progressive. My response is, I don't think you're getting the spirit of what progressive means. If you think
actually means, right.
Yeah.
The main issue is that if someone sees a violation of labor environmental agreements, they have to get their country to file a complaint. And that is an arduous process, and the Obama administration has not been great at it. And whereas if you're a corporation and you see a violation of the trade agreement, in this case TPP, all you have to do is go to an extrajudicial tribunal and sue the government that you think is violating, and can win back these monetary penalties based on your expected future profits, which have been extinguished by the violation of whatever regulation or agreement that's in the trade deal, which is incredible.
That gets to, unfortunately, we won't get to all of your points, so people need to read it on salon.com, but that gets to, I guess, the last two, which I would, or three, which I would link together. Obama denies it's changing laws, says we've never lost a ruling in these extrajudicial corporate secret courts, as if that matters, by the way, because, as long as you've given up your sovereignty and your own court system, you'll lose someday. And the point is you've given up your sovereignty and your own court system. So he denies it's changing laws. It points out irrelevantly, as you use that word, that we've never lost. And lastly, disagrees that it's weakening Dodd-Frank, even though Canada is actually suing, if I understand correctly.
Just on Thursday, Canada said that they're suing the Volcker rule because it prohibits the sale of government-backed debt in Canada. And they're doing that, saying that it's a violation of NAFTA.
Right, so and I'm going to give you a sneak preview.
This is a real thing that can happen as a result of trade deals which seek to smooth out and harmonize and basically put a cap on regulations, whether it's financial regulations or workplace safety rules or whatever else. And corporations, even governments, can sue to get those regulations overturned, not in a direct way, but in an indirect way by making it so expensive to continue to have those regulations that the government will end up changing the law so they don't have to keep paying out to corporations.
Right, and so we're going to, let's summarize it here, David Dayen, and then people will have to read your piece for the rest of it. Yes, it weakens Dodd-Frank. Yes, it changes laws. No, it's not progressive. It misses the point. It's not 40%. Bad deal, and we need to move on. So I guess I'll just conclude by saying, David Dayen, thanks for writing such a great piece, which I encourage people to read, and thanks for coming on the show.
No problem. Thank you very much.
You bet. And we will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.